They got to work in the offseason, bringing in Saquon Barkley, but they lost Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey to retirement. There are also some changes to the coaching staff with new offensive and defensive coordinators in Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. So Jalen Hurts talked about entering the season with another new OC.
I find myself in a situation very similar to college in terms of having a constantly revolving, thing and door in terms of coordinators and coaches. But I've always managed to have success in it. So that's always been a good thing because you've been able to, learn from people and apply it.
Yeah, it's important context there. You think about Jalen Hurts even losing his job in college to Tagovailoa and then, of course, transferring. He had many different coordinators that he dealt with. Hawk, do you expect another year with new coordinators to affect Jalen Hurts?
I think so, and I hope it's in a positive manner because last year this offense, they had incredible talent. They still have great talent, but it seemed unimaginative. It seemed predictable. Jalen Hurts played disjointed, and you saw the frustrations boil over on the sideline. What it felt like was a bunch of A-list actors improvising a movie, right? It didn't feel like it was a real game plan to it, and you need that from Jalen Hurts, and you're hoping that this new offensive coordinator can help Jalen Hurts find a style he can rely on, independent of what kind of offense they're running, because the Eagles need it, this offense needs it. They have Saquon now. They re-signed Devontae. They have A.J. Brown, and the cast is there. They need direction, and they need an offense that is game planned and not just random plays thrown together, and that's what it felt like at times for the Eagles.
A little bit of time between, but Kellen Moore certainly has experience in that division, of course, coming from the Cowboys. Field, is there an obvious position of need that Philly needs to look for in the draft next week?
Yeah, I think it's cornerback, and I think the draft does align well in terms of where they're currently picking at number 22 overall. And specific to the secondary, they got to add some speed to this secondary right now. Darius Slay and James Bradbury, very accomplished players in their own right, but both now in their 30s. You got to add some youth to that secondary. So players like Nate Wiggins from Clemson, who was the fastest defensive back at the entire combine, heck, the fastest defensive player at the entire combine, makes some sense. Kool-Aid McKinstry, Terrion Arnold from Alabama, Cooper DeJean, who's about to make a pick six right here for Iowa, ran that 4.44.
That was like right on cue.
Yeah,
oh my God.
I've seen that play a million times now by the end of this draft cycle, it feels like. But there you see Terrion Arnold, who had 5 interceptions last season and 12 pass breakups, both tied for second in the SEC, Laura. I think the Eagles must continue to address needs this offseason, and their free agency kind of felt a bit atypical for Philadelphia. I mean, spending big on Saquon Barkley, making a reasonable investment in Devin White, that perhaps this team is thinking a bit more short-term than its usual path of always being one step ahead of the curve, Mina.
Yeah, in total agreement with Field that cornerback is the biggest need. I think Arnold and Mitchell will likely be off the board by 22. Yep. And if that's the case, my pick for them would be Cooper DeJean out of Iowa, who I think is a really excellent fit for Vic Fangio. You talked about the new offensive coordinator. They got a new defensive coordinator, his defense. So in DeJean, they would be getting a player who played in a very zone-heavy defense in Iowa. You'd expect some of that in terms of how he's used in Philadelphia, with excellent eyes, route recognition, anticipation, and some of that athleticism that Field alluded to being missing on the back end. He tested well at his own pro day coming off of the injury. The speed is there. There's questions about whether DeJean should play corner or safety in the NFL. We can talk about that in the coming week. But the good news is I think in Philadelphia, they don't have to make that choice right away. They do have 2 starting cornerbacks in Darius Slay and James Bradbury. He can play nickel, safety at first, then maybe transition to playing on the outside. To me, it would just be a really good fit between the player and the scheme.
All right, so I did talk about how Philadelphia has kind of been sort of addressing more immediate needs this offseason. But Howie Roseman is still calling the shots there, still does a very good job with that Philadelphia organization. He is always thinking one step ahead, which is why I also wouldn't rule out an early offensive tackle for the Eagles. Lane Johnson is an unbelievable player, potentially a Hall of Famer one day. But the reason why I had Amarius Mims and Tyler Guyton on the radar for Philadelphia is that he's going to be 34, Will Lane, during this upcoming season. So you're always trying to be one step ahead if you are Philly. And both Amarius Mims and Tyler Guyton, the kind of guys who, if you needed them to play tomorrow, might be a little green relative to some of the top offensive tackle prospects that will probably hear their names called before those two. But if you put them into Jeff Stoutland University, maybe the best offensive line coach in the entire league, both of them have a chance to reach massive, massive ceilings.
You know, I realize that he's been his head coach, so you kind of take it with a grain of salt, but Kirby Smart's singing Marius Mims' praises.
Yeah.
He doesn't really do that often, especially on the offensive side of the ball. He's a defensive guy.
Right.
He loves Mims, thinks he translates really well to the next level.